if the thinking is, as long as the stage is diverse, we're good, that means that the weekly work of intentional diversity is not a part of the DNA of the church. It's just an expectation on the to-do list for a creative team. When a church is trying to become multicultural or making the transition from monocultural to multicultural, that oftentimes the first place that the church will start strategically is in the creative ministry or the worship ministry. Now, normally that's because, that is the place that is the most seen, the most platformed, the thing that people can identify with the most, and oftentimes the stage or the platform, the pulpit, whatever you call it, could be the most strategic place to begin transitioning from monocultural to multicultural. There's no problem with that. That's a good strategy to have because honestly, when people come into your church environment, what they see and what they experience is what will be left with them and what will communicate with them way more than, you getting up in the pulpit and saying something like, hey, we're a multicultural church. If they don't see it, it's a bit inauthentic for them. Even if there are places in your church where you are multicultural, what we see is so powerful just as human beings. And so it's not a bad thing to start in the creative ministry. However, starting strategically in the creative ministry needs to be one of 2 or 3 other things that you and your church are doing to begin the process of moving from monocultural to multicultural. Here's the reason why, is because what can happen over time is that creative ministries, the platformed ministries, the seen ministries in churches then become the bearers of the burden, the wavers of the flag. It can become sort of like, well, so goes the worship ministry, so goes the creative ministry, the platformed ministries, so goes the diversity of the church. So I want to press in on that as a worship leader, as someone who has run a worship ministry for over 20 years in a multicultural setting. Just know that that is an unfair burden to place on the creative ministries and the scene ministries alone. It begins to be an inauthentic expression of a worshiping community to have that burden be on a creative ministry only. Now, as creative people, okay, when I use the word burden, I don't mean that as a negative term. I actually mean just sometimes the responsibility that we have as creative people. There's a part of that we love. We love having the responsibility, right, of being in front of our church, our congregation, and having that responsibility of leading others into an expression and a model of what the Revelation 7 church looks like. However, if the leadership of your church, or if you're watching right now and you are part of the senior leadership team, are part of the elder board, or whatever it is in your church, if the strategy stays, well, as long as the stage and the platform is diverse, we're good. I want you to know that that is not sustainable and it's not fair. Here's something that I want you to remember today. Monocultural ministries within a multicultural church, or even a church that is working its way and becoming multicultural, will always undermine the larger vision of the church as a whole. If the burden of ministry and strategy is on your seen platform ministries only, but then the rest of the church and all the other ministries can stay monocultural and just sort of stay doing whatever it is that they do and not changing, but all the burden is on the creative and platform ministries to do all the changing, there is no way that monocultural ministries can start fueling and recruiting in and breathing life into a multicultural creative ministry. Over time, also, is that if the thinking is, as long as the stage is diverse, we're good. That means that the weekly work of intentional diversity is not a part of the DNA of the church. It's just an expectation on the to-do list for a creative team. That is not a sustainable model. And at some point over time, your leaders in the creative ministries will start to feel the burden because the expectation is you all need to be diverse. And so what happens is when the creative ministry starts to struggle in its own diversity, then the church and the leadership is looking at that ministry to say, what's wrong with you? You need to keep our diversity going. So can you see how that starts to become a problem, particularly even for the leaders of that ministry? They will burn out, they will become discouraged, they will become distressed because the vision of multicultural worship, a multicultural worshiping community in a church, is not held by the entire church and the entire staff and the entire volunteer influencers. It's not held by everyone, so then it becomes literally a burden to one ministry, and that's unfair. It needs to be a strategy that exists within the larger framework of what is the church as a whole trying to accomplish.